The highly anticipated boxing match between Jake Paul and the legendary Mike Tyson did not live up to expectations. The outcome of the fight, which went to a decision, left fans disappointed, with many questioning the actual quality of the match. In the end, it became clear that while the fight was billed as a spectacle, it lacked the excitement and intensity that fans were hoping for. One of the most frustrating aspects of the event was the technical difficulties, which were unavoidable for viewers. The stream continuously buffered throughout the fight, which made it hard to follow the action. For those who managed to watch, the question of which was worse, dealing with the buffering or watching the fight itself, was raised. It was a struggle, to say the least. To add to the frustration, there were moments where Jake Paul appeared to not be fully committed to knocking out Tyson. While Jake Paul is known for his aggressive style in the ring, there were times during this fight when he seemed to hold back, possibly out of respect for Tyson's legendary status, or perhaps due to the realization that Tyson still held some dangerous power despite his age. Imagine spending $2 million for a VIP package just to attend this event in person. At least they didn't have to deal with the buffering issues that plagued many of us watching from home. For the viewers, however, the constant freezing of the stream made the experience even more exasperating. Even before the fight started, the technical issues began, and it only got worse as the night went on. While it's understandable that technical glitches might happen during a live stream, especially since this was Netflix's first foray into live streaming a sporting event, it was still incredibly annoying for fans of combat sports who had been waiting for this moment. What made it even more infuriating was the pacing of the event. Boxing events, especially pay-per-view shows, always seem to have the worst pacing. The main event was scheduled to start at 11 p.m. Eastern, but it didn't actually begin until after midnight. The undercard fight started at 8 p.m., and yet somehow the event dragged on for hours. Even UFC events, which are known for their punctuality, don't suffer from these types of delays. Fans were subjected to long stretches of commercials, and when the commentators were talking, they didn't even cover interesting topics. It felt like they were filling air with meaningless chatter, instead of providing any real insight or analysis into the fights. The entrance for Jake Paul was another example of over-the-top theatrics. He came out in a car moving at a glacial pace, literally crawling at just 2 miles per hour. The cameramen were walking faster than the car, which was both awkward and unentertaining. It seemed like a spectacle more suited for professional wrestling than boxing, and for many viewers, it felt like it went on for far too long. This theatrical approach took away from the authenticity of the sport and made the event feel less like a serious fight and more like a circus. The introductions were equally drawn out. The announcer took forever to introduce Mike Tyson, using phrases like "the one and only" and "the baddest man on the planet," which seemed overblown and unnecessary. Tyson, a living legend in boxing, didn't need such a grand introduction. Fans know who he is, and if anything, this lengthy introduction probably annoyed Tyson himself, who just wanted to get in the ring and fight. The pauses between each segment felt more like an eternity than a moment to savor the atmosphere. And by the time the fight finally started, many viewers were already frustrated. To make matters worse, the rounds in the fight were only 2 minutes long, which is an incredibly short period of time for boxing. The breaks between rounds were only 1 minute, and during these breaks, commercials were played. This was not something we're used to seeing in pay-per-view boxing events, where viewers expect the breaks to be more seamless. The commercials broke the immersion, disrupting the flow of the fight. It's difficult to stay focused when you're invested in a fight and suddenly you're bombarded with ads. It felt like they were giving us every reason to stop watching, even though we had already paid for the event. Now, when we finally focus on the fight itself, the disappointment continues. Jake Paul, who had been talking a big game going into the fight, didn't deliver the knockout that many expected. He carried Mike Tyson throughout most of the fight, landing some shots. But Tyson's defense held up well. Tyson, despite being well past his prime at the age of 58, showed that he still had the chin to absorb punches and stay on his feet. He managed to survive the fight and go the distance, which in itself was impressive, given his age and the fact that he hadn't fought in years. Jake Paul did land some jabs, right overhands and right straights, as well as a few left hooks and uppercuts. Tyson, for his part, displayed good defensive skills. Despite his physical decline, he was able to slip and block some of Jake's punches. Tyson's experience and ring savvy allowed him to survive and avoid being knocked out. But there was an obvious speed difference between the two fighters. Jake, being 27 years old, was much faster than Tyson, whose legs and knees were clearly not what they used to be. Tyson seemed to struggle with his movement in the ring, and at times it looked like he could barely even move. However, Tyson's defensive skills still made the fight competitive. He was able to duck and slip Jake's punches, and even though some of Jake's shots landed, Tyson absorbed them without going down. Jake had his moments, especially when he was able to time Tyson's movements. But there were also moments when he failed to capitalize on these opportunities. For instance, there was a moment when Tyson bobbed and weaved with Jake's jab, and it seemed like Jake might throw his signature right hand. But he hesitated, backing away instead of pressing the advantage. This was an unusual move from Jake, who usually follows up his jab with a powerful right hand. While Tyson's age was clearly a factor in his lack of movement, it was his defensive ability that kept him in the fight. The fact that he was able to go the distance with Jake Paul, despite being significantly older and slower, was a testament to his skills and experience as a fighter. Tyson didn't get knocked out, and that was probably the most impressive thing about the fight. He showed that even in his twilight years, he still had enough to make it to the final bell. Of course, there were several factors at play here that made the fight less than ideal. The gloves used were 14 Oz, which are almost like sparring gloves. The rounds were only 2 minutes long, and the breaks were short. This made it feel less like a competitive boxing match and more like a training session. Moreover, Jake Paul was expected to deliver a dominant performance, given that he was much younger and in better shape than Tyson. Yet, he failed to get the knockout, which was a letdown for many fans who had high expectations for the fight. It's also worth noting that Jake Paul's actions during the fight were sometimes questionable. The referee had to warn him multiple times not to measure Tyson by keeping his arm extended in front of his face, which is against the rules in boxing. This just goes to show that even Jake Paul, despite his growing experience in the ring, still has a lot to learn about the finer points of the sport. The sport of boxing has a lot of intricate rules, and it's clear that Jake is still adjusting to them. This fight highlighted that there's still a significant gap between Jake Paul's level and the top-tier fighters in boxing. Reflecting on the fight, it's clear that it was a mismatch. Jake Paul, in his prime, against a 58-year-old Tyson, who hasn't fought in years, was never going to be an even contest. The athleticism and speed advantage that Jake Paul had over Tyson were undeniable. But at the end of the day, Tyson's legendary status and his defensive skills made the fight more competitive than it had any right to be. Looking forward, it's clear that Jake Paul needs to fight opponents who are closer to his age and skill level. Fighting legends like Mike Tyson, who are far past their prime, doesn't do much for Jake's credibility as a boxer. Fans want to see him face real competition. He fought Tommy Fury, and that's where his one loss came from. A rematch with Tommy Fury or a fight with KSI would be far more interesting than another bout with an aging legend. Tyson, Holyfield, and other veterans of the sport have earned their place in history. But it's time for them to retire and leave the spotlight to the younger generation. In conclusion, the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight was a circus from start to finish. The technical difficulties, pacing issues, and lack of action in the ring left many fans frustrated. Tyson's defense and ability to take punches were impressive, but the fight as a whole was underwhelming. Jake Paul, despite his speed and youth, couldn't deliver the knockout that many were expecting. Moving forward, it's clear that Jake Paul should focus on fighting opponents closer to his age and skill level. Boxing, after all, is a sport for the young and the hungry, and Tyson's time in the ring has long passed. If you like this video, please subscribe the channel and hit the notification bell for more videos.